That day, Holmes and I, responding to Lestrade's invitation, travelled to the Boscombe Valley in the west of England. A tragedy had occurred there. A father had been murdered, and his son was identified as the prime suspect. The case itself wasn't complicated, but we had to spend extra time handling it to prevent the grudges of the previous generation from affecting the bright future of the next. Everyone must be held accountable for the sins they've committed, but can this painful cycle of hatred be prevented from being passed on to our descendants? Before we even arrived, the Boscombe Valley case had already been deemed conclusive by the coroner and the police court, as the circumstantial evidence was overwhelmingly convincing. The case unfolded with the victim, Mr. Charles McCarthy, heading out on an appointment on the day of the incident. Soon after, witnesses saw his son, James McCarthy, who had been away from home for some time, following not far behind with a gun under his arm. The two McCarthys were later seen engaging in a violent quarrel at the Boscombe pool, the crime scene. The witness, who was afraid that they were going to fight, left to find help, but soon young McCarthy came to seek assistance, said that he had found his father dead in the wood. The head of deceased had been beaten in by repeated blows of some heavy and blunt weapon. The injuries were such as might very well have been inflicted by the butt end of his son's gun, which was found lying on the grass within a few paces of the body. Combined with the earlier witness testimonies, this put him in a highly damning position. Both Lestrade and I agreed that the case is as plain as a pikestaff. It seemed almost certain that McCarthy would be convicted. Holmes had a different opinion, however, noting that there were some significant points in McCarthy's testimony that warranted attention. Holmes' perspective brought great relief to our client, Miss Alice Turner. She shared some details about her father, Mr. John Turner, and the victim from their time in Victoria, Australia. According to her, the disagreement between Mr. McCarthy and his son centered around her. The older McCarthy wanted his son to marry Miss Alice, and, notably, Alice herself was in favor of the union. For reasons that remained unclear, however, young McCarthy was opposed to the marriage, and this opposition led to the heated argument between father and son.
I am ashamed of you, Holmes. Why should you raise up hopes which you are bound to disappoint? I am not over-tender of heart, but I call it cruel.
After Miss Turner left, Lestrade couldn't help but scold Holmes, believing he shouldn't make promises he couldn't keep. However, Holmes remained as confident as ever in himself.
I think that I see my way to clearing James McCarthy.
I did not wonder at Lestrade's opinion, and yet I had so much faith in Sherlock Holmes' insight that I could not lose hope, so long as every fresh fact seemed to strengthen his conviction of young McCarthy's innocence. While Holmes and Lestrade went to the detention centre to meet young McCarthy, therefore, I took the time to review the verbatim account of the inquest once more. According to young McCarthy, his encounter with his father was entirely coincidental. He had initially gone near the scene for a hunting when he heard a cry of cooey, which was a usual signal between his father and himself. Only then did he realize his father was there as well. A conversation ensued which led to high words and almost to blows, but he claims he did not resort to violence and instead walked away to cool off. However, shortly after leaving, he heard a hideous outcry behind him, which caused him to run back again. He found his father expiring upon the ground, with his head terribly injured. He first knelt beside his father for some minutes before running to seek assistance. The old man mumbled a few words before he died, but young McCarthy could only catch some allusion to a rat. Notably, under questioning from the witness, young McCarthy mentioned that when he heard his father's scream and rushed back, he had a vague impression that as he ran forward, something lay upon the ground to the left of him. It seemed to him to be something grey in colour, a coat of some sort, or a plaid perhaps. When he rose from him father he looked round for it, but it was gone. I still don't know which part of the testimony gave Holmes confidence, but while I was contemplating, Holmes returned and remarked the news he had just received.
That young McCarthy is not a very quick-witted youth, though comely to look at and, I should think, sound at heart. He is as puzzled by the case as anyone else. Additionally, I also learned from him the reason he could not propose to Miss Alice. He had been married to a barmaid for 2 years. But now, he genuinely loves Alice. However, out of a sense of responsibility, he cannot divorce his wife and is too afraid to disclose his marriage. As a result, he finds himself in a very awkward situation.
It seems quite complicated.
Indeed, good has come out of evil. However, for the barmaid, finding from the papers that young McCarthy is in serious trouble and likely to be hanged, has thrown him over utterly and has written to him to say that she has a husband already in the Bermuda dockyard, so that there is really no tie between them. I think that that bit of news has consoled young McCarthy for all that he has suffered.
Holmes looked as though he had already cleared young McCarthy's name and was about to offer his blessings to a pair of loving newlyweds. But if he is innocent, who has done it?
Watson, you're far more perceptive than Lestrade, but I'm not ready to reveal the name just yet. We shall leave all minor matters until tomorrow.
Holmes smiled mysteriously at me. His words had actually addressed my greatest suspicion. McCarthy was indeed not the murderer. The on-site investigation the next day was led by Lestrade, and through him, we gained further insight into the relationship between old McCarthy and Turner. The men had known each other in Australia, so it was not unnatural that when they came to settle down, they would do so as close to each other as possible. Turner was apparently the wealthier of the two, so McCarthy became his tenant but still maintained a relationship of perfect equality, as they were frequently seen together. Even stranger was Turner's excessive kindness toward McCarthy. According to Lestrade, not only did McCarthy occupy the best farm owned by Turner, but he didn't even have to pay rent for it.
Does it not strike you as a little singular that this McCarthy should still talk of marrying his son to Turner's daughter, and that in such a very cocksure manner, as if it were merely a case of a proposal and all else would follow?
Holmes seemed to be hinting at something, but Lestrade merely shrugged, looking completely confident in his conclusion.
We have got to the deductions and the inferences, Holmes, that McCarthy Sr. met his death from McCarthy Jr. and that all theories to the contrary are the merest moonshine.
The on-site investigation was, as always, Holmes's domain. His energetic nature was poured into every corner of the Boscombe pool, the crime scene. Although Lestrade thought it was indifferent and contemptuous, Holmes continued to demonstrate his extraordinary observation and uncovered clues leading to the true culprit. It was about 10 minutes before we regained our cab and drove back into Ross, Holmes still carrying with him the stone which he had picked up in the wood.
This may interest you, Lestrade. The murder was done with it.
How do you know, then?
The grass was growing under it. It had only lain there a few days. There was no sign of a place whence it had been taken. It corresponds with the injuries.
And the murderer?
Is a tall man, left-handed, limps with the right leg, wears thick-soled shooting boots and a grey cloak. There are several other indications, but these may be enough to aid us in our search.
I am a practical man, Holmes, and I really cannot undertake to go about the country looking for a left-handed gentleman with a game leg. I should become the laughing-stock of Scotland Yard.
All right, I have given you the chance. Here are your lodgings. Goodbye. I shall drop you a line before I leave.
Having left Lestrade at his rooms, we drove to our hotel, where we found lunch upon the table. Holmes was silent and buried in thought, with a pained expression upon his face, as one who finds himself in a perplexing position. It seems you have resolved all the issues in this case.
The truth alone cannot fully resolve this case. Even though the truth is apparent, I know you are still puzzled. I can offer you some hints so you can understand who the real culprit is.
Pray do so.
Among the evidence overlooked by the coroner and the police, there are three noteworthy points: the father-son secret signal cooey, the peculiar dying murmur about a rat, and the mysterious missing grey cloak. The presence of the grey cloak indicates that there was indeed a third party at the scene, as confirmed by the investigation of the footprints. Therefore, the remaining analysis focuses on the signal and the murmur. First, let us focus on the signal. Cooey is a distinctly Australian cry used among Australians. There is a strong presumption that the person whom McCarthy expected to meet him at Boscombe Pool was someone who had been in Australia. Then, about rat, this is a map of the colony of Victoria. Can you read the name of this area?
Ballarat. As I read it, Holmes then put his hand over part of the map.
What do you read now?
Rat. Wait, do you mean?
Quite so. That was the word the man uttered, and of which his son only caught the last two syllables. He was trying to utter the name of his murderer, so-and-so, of Ballarat. After getting this information, I had someone look into McCarthy and Turner's situation in Australia. While we didn't find anything on Mr. Turner, we discovered that McCarthy had once worked as a convoy guard for a gold mine and had been ambushed by the notorious Ballarat gang, resulting in the loss of the cargo he was escorting. He was eventually forced to return to England in poverty. Additionally, the Ballarat gang is still on the Australian government's most wanted list.
I was now completely enlightened. Staring at Sherlock Holmes in shock, I had already figured out the name of the true culprit. Just at that moment, an unexpected visitor knocked on our door. The man was Mr. John Turner, the father of our client Miss Alice Turner, and the very person we had just been discussing.
Pray sit down on the sofa, Mr. Turner. I assume you are aware of the reason why I brought you here.
Mr. Turner remained silent for a long time before he solemnly bowed to Holmes and made a request.
Mr. Holmes, I have heard about you from my daughter, and I trust your abilities. I am grateful for your consideration in not coming directly to my home to avoid scandal. I know that I cannot hide my secrets from you, and I do not wish for that young man to come to harm because of my guilt. I am willing to confess, but as you can see, I am a dying man and have a daughter. I hope to die under my own roof, beside my dear girl. This is why I have remained silent until now. So I ask you, help that young man, and help my daughter as well. It will break her heart if she hears that I am arrested.
Holmes rose and sat down at the table with his pen in his hand and a bundle of paper before him.
Just tell us the truth. I shall jot down the facts. You will sign it, and Watson here can witness it. Then I could produce your confession at the last extremity to save young McCarthy. I promise you that I shall not use it unless it is absolutely needed.
As Holmes had deduced, Mr. Turner had been a member of the Ballarat gang in Australia. He and his accomplices had ambushed the gold convoy that Mr. McCaskey was guarding. They got away with the gold, became wealthy men, and made their way over to England without being suspected. There he determined to settle down to a quiet and respectable life. However, an unexpected encounter reunited Mr. Turner with Mr. McCarthy. From then on, McCarthy used Turner's past as leverage, obtaining nearly everything he desired. But eventually, McCarthy asked a thing which Mr. Turner could not give: his daughter, Alice.
I did it, Mr. Holmes. I would do it again. That bastard, in his final times, was urging his son to marry my daughter with as little regard for what she might think, as if she were a slut from off the streets. I could not bear to see my daughter treated that way. My only regret is that I even considered getting rid of the lad as well. In truth, I had any dislike to the lad, but the blood of that foul and venomous beast was in him, and that was enough. When I witnessed that lad knelt in such agony beside his father, however, and thought of the scene when my wife passed away, I suddenly realized how irredeemable my malice toward him had been. I knew the character of him and Alice's feelings for him. If I had truly gone through with it, Alice would have lived a lifetime in torment. So I fled, fetching the grey cloak I had initially left behind, and have been in a state of confusion ever since. That is the true story, gentlemen, of all that occurred."
After his story, the old man signed the statement which had been drawn out.
"I will keep your confession, and if McCarthy is condemned I shall be forced to use it. If not, it shall never be seen by mortal eye, and your secret, whether you be alive or dead, shall be safe with us."
This was Holmes' promise, and the dying old man's final wish.
"Farewell, then, and your own deathbeds, when they come, will be the easier for the thought of the peace which you have given to mine."
After receiving the reassurance he sought, the old man left, knowing his request had been granted. His face, once burdened with guilt and fear, now showed a faint sense of peace, as though the weight of his long-held secret had finally been lifted. In the end, Holmes fulfilled his promise. James McCarthy was acquitted at the assizes on the strength of a number of objections, which had been drawn out by Holmes and submitted to the defending counsel. Old Turner lived for 7 months after our interview, but he is now dead, and there is every prospect that the son and daughter may come to live happily together in ignorance of the black cloud which rests upon their past.